I've heard the claim made that atheists cannot have a justifiable framework for their morality, since their moral framework is not grounded in a deity. The argument basically goes that if each man can decide his own morality, who is to say which moral framework is best? If Tim can say, my morality is right, and Sally can say, my morality is right, then who is right? The theist would make the claim that only a higher authority or mediator can be the decider on what is right and wrong. The theist would then claim that since objective right and wrong exist, then God must exist. To respond to this claim, I will use a summarized version of Richard Carrier's The Goal Theory of Moral Value. Firstly, we must distinguish oughts from is's. Morality deals with oughts, such as you ought not to lie, or you ought not to kill. Theists often accuse atheists of committing the naturalistic fallacy by inferring an ought from an is. For instance, saying what is the case, like killing causes suffering, does not show what ought to be the case, like killing is wrong. In the goal theory of moral value, every ought is reduced to an is in the same way Kant did for his hypothetical imperatives. A quick example is someone saying if you want to clean your teeth, you ought to brush them. Of course, this is not normative in that it applies to everyone. For instance, if a dentist wants to see the effect of not brushing, then this statement does not apply to her. Harriet states that morals work the same way as this ought statement, except they are normative. It does this by identifying a universal motive for moral action. This universal motive is happiness. This makes sense because whatever reason you offer for anyone to be moral, when we keep asking why, eventually you will land on because it's necessary for your happiness. This is true even in Christianity, where if faith in Christ does not lead to one's ultimate happiness, then there would be little point in being a Christian. Happiness is so important that happiness becomes the core value, which is in agreement with Aristotle. By happiness, I do not mean fleeting momentary pleasure or joy, but abiding contentment that makes life worth living. So basically, this form of morality goes like this. You ought to be moral if you want to find true, lasting happiness and to avoid various forms of misery. Now let's go back to my example of Tim and Sally. If Tim says, follow my moral framework, and Sally says, follow mine, who is right? Well, to determine this, I will use an analogy comparing goal theory with technology. Like techniques for farming corn, there is more than one way to do things. But there are better ways and worse ways, possibly even one best way, and this varies by circumstance. But in all cases, it is the nature of the universe itself that determines this, and not human opinion. A good moral technology is better at securing human happiness than a poor one, and this is a fact independent of my or anyone's belief. Thus, goal moral theory is objective and not a subjective ethical system, even though it derives entirely from nature of a conscious being. But how do you prove one moral framework is better than another? Let's say Sally's moral framework says being compassionate will bring happiness, and Tim's moral framework says suffering will bring happiness. How can we know who is right? Moral values can be measured scientifically and studied by psychologists and sociologists. We can look at psychological studies and see that compassion brings more enduring happiness to an individual, and that people who cause suffering to themselves and others do not produce an enduring happiness, but instead a risky and self-destructive way of life. Of course, we need more study. Until the time when a methodological investigation of morality is done, a naturalist can use her experience to fill in the blank. A naturalist can use her experience to fill in the blank, since a naturalist's knowledge can come from non-scientific sources. She would just place the highest authority, not the sole authority, in unbiased science. A final objection would be that what you value is not what I value, since values are subjective. Since values refer to individuals' experiences, they are subjective. But it doesn't follow that none of these values are objective in the sense of being universally shared by everyone. But what about people who don't want to be happy? The fact that there might be some people who do not want to be happy would not affect the normativity of moral values for the rest of us, only for them. In the end, Carrier has set out a naturalistic moral theory that is both objective and scientifically verifiable. If need be, I will make a further video demonstrating reasons why lying or stealing is wrong, the values that naturally follow from happiness, and any what-if scenario questions that I happen to come across. Anyway, thank you for your time.